I never thought my family's true colors would show through a hospital bed. While I lay there after a near-fatal crash, my parents chose my brother's award ceremony over visiting their dying daughter. Now, months later, they're at my door begging for money to bail him out of a massive environmental fraud scandal. Funny how family loyalty only matters when they need something from you. I never thought I'd be sitting in a remote cabin in Montana, watching snow fall outside my window while my sister's face dominated every news channel across the country. Yet here I am, Elena Martinez, 35, hiding from the media circus that has engulfed my family after Sarah's environmental scandal broke. It started 3 months ago when I received an urgent call from my mother at 3 a.m. I was working late at my veterinary clinic, finishing up emergency surgery on a German Shepherd who had swallowed 3 tennis balls. Mom was hysterical, barely coherent, but I caught the key phrases: Sarah's in trouble, the FBI, and please come home. Sarah had always been the family's golden child. While I spent my days treating sick animals in our small Arizona town, she rose through the ranks of Envirotech, one of the largest green energy companies in the Southwest. My parents never missed a chance to remind everyone about their brilliant daughter who was saving the planet. Every family gathering became a showcase of Sarah's latest achievement: her TED Talk about sustainable energy, her Forbes 30 Under 40 feature, her Environmental Leadership Award. Meanwhile, my work saving animals was dismissed as playing with pets. When I opened my own clinic, my parents didn't even attend the ribbon-cutting ceremony. They were at Sarah's company gala that day, watching her receive yet another corporate accolade. But now Sarah needed help, and suddenly I mattered. The FBI had uncovered evidence that Envirotech had been dumping toxic chemicals into protected waterways while promoting themselves as environmental champions. Sarah, as Chief Sustainability Officer, was at the center of the investigation. The company had been falsifying environmental impact reports for years, and Sarah's signature was on every document. My parents wanted me to sell my clinic to help pay for Sarah's legal defense. "She's your sister," Mom pleaded. "She was just following orders. They're trying to make her the scapegoat." I might have considered it despite everything, if not for what happened next. While reviewing the case files that Sarah's lawyer shared with us, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. One of the contaminated sites was less than a mile from my clinic. Over the past year, I'd seen a bizarre spike in pet poisonings, dogs and cats coming in with mysterious symptoms that didn't match any normal toxin profile. 3 of them died despite my best efforts. I confronted Sarah during a jail visit. She knew. She'd known all along that her company was poisoning animals in our community, including pets I treated. She'd seen my name on the public health complaints I'd filed, but she said nothing, did nothing, while I watched beloved pets suffer and die, while their families grieved. I couldn't risk my position, she said, not meeting my eyes. The company was about to go public. My stock options would have been worth millions. That's when I realized the truth about my perfect sister. Her environmental crusade, her passionate speeches about protecting the planet. It was all an act. The only green she cared about was money. I walked out of that jail and never looked back. But my parents' campaign of guilt and manipulation was relentless. They remortgaged their house to pay Sarah's legal fees. When that wasn't enough, they started calling all my emergency contacts, telling them I was having a mental breakdown and needed an intervention. They claimed my jealousy of Sarah had finally made me snap. The last straw came when they showed up at my clinic with a TV crew from a local news station, planning to ambush me with a public appeal to help my sister. They didn't care that it would destroy my business's reputation. Sarah's image was all that mattered. I sold the clinic the next day, not to help Sarah, but to escape. I bought this cabin in Montana under an LLC, changed my phone number, and disappeared. The only ones who know where I am are my most trusted staff members who helped relocate all our long-term patients to other caring clinics. Last week, Sarah accepted a plea deal: 5 years in federal prison, testimony against Envirotech's executives, and a lifetime ban from working in environmental services. My parents are on every news show, crying about their daughter being sacrificed to protect corporate interests. They don't mention the other victims, the families whose water was poisoned, the wildlife that died, the pets I couldn't save. They don't talk about how Sarah chose money over morality, or how they enabled her every step of the way. Yesterday, I received a letter from Sarah's lawyer. She's written a memoir about her journey from environmental crusader to whistleblower. The publisher wants me to contribute a chapter about how I abandoned her in her hour of need. There's a 6-figure offer attached. I burned the letter in my fireplace and watched the ashes mix with the falling snow. Some might call me cold-hearted for turning my back on family, but I've learned that true loyalty isn't about about blindly supporting your blood relative. It's about standing up for what's right, especially when, it hurts. My new clinic opens next month, serving the rural communities around my mountain hideaway. My staff is joining me here, away from the toxic environment our hometown became. We've already got a waiting list of patients, and not one of them cares about my famous sister or my family drama. They just know me as the vet who puts animals first. Sarah's story is still making headlines, but I'm done being a character in her drama. I'm writing my own story now, one healing at a time. Just when I thought I'd found peace in my Montana sanctuary, the past came knocking, literally. I opened my door one snowy morning to find Thomas Chin, Sarah's former assistant at Envirotech, shivering on my porch. "Your sister sent me," he said, his breath frosting in the cold air. "But not for the reason you think." Thomas had been Sarah's right hand for 3 years. In all the news coverage, he was portrayed as another victim of her deception. What he told me over coffee changed everything I thought I knew about the scandal. Sarah wasn't just following orders, he explained, pulling out a laptop filled with encrypted files. She was the one who discovered the dumping in the first place, 6 months after joining Envirotech. But instead of reporting it, she saw an opportunity. The files showed how Sarah had methodically gathered evidence of the company's environmental crimes, not to expose them, but to leverage her silence for promotions and stock options. She built her entire environmental crusader persona knowing it was based on lies. The more prominent she became in environmental circles, the more valuable her silence was to Envirotech. The FBI didn't just stumble onto this case, Thomas continued. Sarah orchestrated her own downfall when the company refused her demand for a seat on the board. She leaked just enough evidence to implicate herself along with the executives, knowing she'd get a lighter sentence as a cooperating witness while still keeping most of her money hidden in offshore accounts. I felt sick. "Why are you telling me this?" Thomas pulled out one final document, a series of veterinary reports I'd filed about the pet poisonings, with Sarah's handwritten notes in the margins calculating the acceptable cost of keeping the dumping sites active. "Because she's not done," he said. "The memoir, the publicity tour she's planning after her release, it's all part of her rehabilitation strategy. She's going to paint herself as a naive idealist who got in over her head, then found redemption. And she needs you to complete the narrative." "What do you mean?" "The devoted sister who never lost faith in her, who stood by her during her darkest hours. Your reunion will be the emotional climax of her book tour. She's already pitched it to Oprah." The rage I felt must have shown on my face, because Thomas quickly added, "I'm not here to help her. I'm here because she destroyed my career along with countless lives, and she needs to face real consequences, not another PR triumph." We spent the next week going through his evidence. It was overwhelming. Sarah hadn't just covered up environmental crimes, she'd profited from them every step of the way, carefully building her public image while private accounts swelled with blood money. When we finished, I asked Thomas the question that had been nagging at me. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" He was quiet for a long moment. "The same reason you kept trying to win your parents' approval even when you knew it was impossible. Sometimes the hardest chains to break are the ones we forge ourselves." I knew what I had to do. Sarah might have orchestrated her own takedown, but she was still controlling the narrative. It was time for the real story to come out. Working with Thomas, I compiled everything into a comprehensive report. Not just the environmental crimes and financial fraud, but the calculated way Sarah had built her false reputation, the lives she'd ruined, the animals that had died because of her choices. We included testimony from former Envirotech employees, environmental scientists, and families affected by the contamination. Rather than go to the media, who were already invested in Sarah's redemption narrative, we sent our findings directly to the federal prosecutors and environmental protection agencies. Sarah's carefully planned plea deal imploded. New charges were filed. My parents' response was predictable. They called me a traitor, claimed I was destroying the family out of jealousy, even suggested I had fabricated evidence because I was mentally unstable. But for the first time in my life, their words had no power over me. Sarah, true to form, tried to spin the situation to her advantage. She gave tear-filled interviews claiming she was being persecuted by her troubled sister who had issues with authority since childhood. She even suggested my work with animals was a sign of inability to connect with humans. None of it worked. The evidence was too overwhelming, the pattern of deliberate deception too clear. Her plea deal was revoked. She's now facing decades in prison instead of years. Thomas decided to stay in Montana, taking a job at a local environmental consulting firm that actually practices what it preaches. He's helping me document the long-term effects of envirotechs dumping on wildlife populations. Twice a week, we visit local schools to teach kids about genuine environmental stewardship. My parents still appear on TV occasionally, still defending Sarah, still claiming she's the victim of a corporate conspiracy. But their audiences are getting smaller, their outrage increasingly met with skepticism rather than sympathy. Meanwhile, my clinic is thriving. We've become a regional center for wildlife rehabilitation, working closely with state conservation officers. The mountain communities have embraced us completely, and not a day goes by that I don't feel grateful for this fresh start. Last week, I received another letter, this time from a federal prosecutor. Sarah is trying to negotiate a new plea deal, offering to testify about our parents' involvement in her schemes. Apparently, they didn't just enable her behavior, they actively helped her hide money and deceive investigators. I should feel vindicated, but mostly I just feel sad. Sad for the family we could have been if love hadn't been conditional on success at any cost. Sad for the good we could have done if appearance hadn't mattered more than reality. But I'm no longer drowning in that sadness. I'm building something real here, something based on genuine care and honest work. And for the first time in my life, I don't need anyone else's approval to know I'm doing the right thing. The truth has a way of causing avalanches, especially in the mountains. 6 months after Thomas and I exposed Sarah's calculated deception, the ripple effects are still spreading through our lives in unexpected ways. The biggest shock came from an unlikely source, our grandmother's will. Clara Martinez passed away 20 years ago, leaving behind a substantial fortune from her software company. Most of it went to my parents, but there was a secret codicil that only activated under specific conditions. Grandma Clara, it turns out, had been watching us more closely than anyone realized. She'd set up a trust that would only be revealed if one of her grandchildren demonstrated genuine moral courage in the face of family pressure. The trustee, her former business partner, had been monitoring our lives all these years. The letter from the trustee arrived last week. By exposing Sarah's crimes despite our parents' manipulation, I had met the conditions. The trust, worth over $10 million, was now mine, with a catch. It could only be used for environmental conservation and animal welfare projects. When I called the trustee to verify this wasn't an elaborate hoax, she shared something that made me cry. Grandma Clara had left a letter explaining her decision. She'd seen how my parents favored Sarah from an early age, how they pushed her toward prestigious careers while dismissing my love for animals as childish. I made my fortune in technology, she wrote, but my heart was always in conservation. I was too afraid of disappointing my own parents to follow that dream. I see that same passion in you, Elena, and I see how they're trying to stifle it. This money is your chance to prove that kindness isn't weakness, that doing right matters more than looking successful. The irony is staggering. All those years Sarah spent cultivating her fake environmental crusader image, and the real family environmental legacy was silently waiting for me. I've spent the last month setting up the Clara Martinez Wildlife Conservation Foundation. Our first project is studying the long-term effects of chemical contamination on mountain ecosystems, directly addressing the damage companies like Envirotech caused. Thomas is heading our research team. My parents, predictably, are trying to contest the trust. They claim I manipulated Grandma Clara, despite the fact that I was 12 when she died. They're also demanding part of the money go to Sarah's legal defense, citing family obligations. Their lawsuit led to another revelation. The trustee had recordings of every conversation they'd had with Grandma Clara about the trust over the years, including one where they explicitly promised to support both their daughters equally, to nurture our individual passions rather than forcing us into their chosen paths. Those recordings are now evidence in a broader investigation into my parents' financial dealings. The prosecutors weren't kidding about their involvement in Sarah's schemes. It seems they didn't just enable her fraud, they helped design it. drawing on years of experience in corporate manipulation. Sarah, watching her last chance at a lenient sentence evaporate, finally broke her silence about our parents' role. She revealed how they'd pushed her toward envirotech specifically because they knew the company's environmental compliance was weak. They saw it as an opportunity for her to gain leverage, to build her career on controlled corruption. They said appearances matter more than actions, she testified. That the world rewards people who tell it what it wants to hear. They taught me how to build my environmental activist persona while maximizing profitable violations. They called it playing both sides of the green. The media narrative has shifted dramatically. Instead of the story of one corrupt executive, it's become a case study in toxic family dynamics and generational manipulation. Investigators are now looking into other companies where my parents served as consultants, finding similar patterns of environmental fraud hidden behind charitable foundations and public accolades. Through it all, my clinic continues to grow. We've added a state-of-the-art wildlife rehabilitation center, funded by the trust. Local schools run field trips here to learn about animal care and environmental responsibility. The kids especially love our newest resident, a three-legged wolf we rescued from an illegal trap, who's become our ambassador for predator conservation. Thomas suggested we name the wolf Clara after my grandmother. She's fierce and gentle at the same time, protecting her pack while showing surprising tenderness to the injured animals we bring in. It feels right, honoring the woman who believed in me long after she was gone. Last month, I received a letter from Sarah in prison. She's finally dropped the pretense of being a misunderstood idealist. Instead, she wrote about growing up watching me care for injured animals, how she used to envy my certainty about what I wanted to do with my life. While she was winning awards for environmental leadership, I was actually helping the environment, one creature at a time. I don't expect forgiveness, she wrote. But I want you to know that you were right all along. The path to hell isn't just paved with good intentions. Sometimes it's paved with fake intentions, with the stories we tell ourselves about who we are versus what we actually do. I haven't replied to her letter yet. Maybe I never will. But I framed Grandma Clara's letter and hung it in the clinic's lobby. It reminds me daily that doing the right thing isn't about recognition or reward. It's about being true to yourself and your values, even when, especially when, the rest of the world tries to tell you those values don't matter. The snow is falling again outside my window, but I'm no longer hiding. I'm building something here in these mountains, something that would make Grandma Clara proud. It turns out that sometimes the family legacy you're meant to carry forward isn't the one you were pushed toward, but the one that was quietly waiting for you to find your own way. The Foundation's first annual report is dedicated to her memory, for Clara Martinez, who knew that the truest measure of success is not in what you take from the world, but in what you give back to it. I think she'd like that. I know I do. The world has a strange way of coming full circle. 1 year after I exposed Sarah's environmental crimes, I found myself back in Arizona, not to reconcile with my family, but to testify in their federal trial. The prosecution had built an airtight case showing how my parents had orchestrated similar schemes across multiple companies for decades. The evidence was damning. Their consulting firm, ostensibly focused on corporate sustainability, had been a front for what prosecutors called an environmental fraud factory. They would help companies set up elaborate greenwashing schemes, complete with fake certifications and manipulated data. The millions they made from this weren't just consulting fees. They were criminal proceeds. Walking into that courtroom was the hardest thing I've ever done. Not because I was afraid of facing them, but because I finally saw them clearly for the first time. They sat there in their expensive suits, looking polished and professional as ever, while the prosecution detailed how they had helped poison communities across the Southwest. Sarah had already pleaded guilty to additional charges and was cooperating fully. Her testimony painted a picture of systematic corruption that made even the judge visibly angry. She described how our parents had groomed her from childhood to be their perfect corporate fraud machine, teaching her to exploit environmental regulations for profit while maintaining a pristine public image. They said Elena was weak because she actually cared about animals, Sarah testified, not meeting my eyes. They said real success comes from controlling perceptions, not wasting time on actual good deeds. The most shocking revelation came from their financial records. They had been siphoning money from their schemes into a secret foundation that supposedly supported environmental education. In reality, it was funding lobbying efforts to weaken environmental protections and make their fraudulent activities easier to conceal. My testimony focused on the pet poisonings near my old clinic. I presented detailed veterinary records showing the progression of symptoms as Envirotex dumping contaminated the groundwater. The jury saw photos of the animals we couldn't save, heard recordings of my desperate calls to environmental authorities that went nowhere because my parents' connections buried the complaints. During cross-examination, their lawyer tried to paint me as a resentful daughter out for revenge. But the evidence spoke for itself. The prosecution had emails where they joked about my bleeding heart, concerns over the dying animals, discussing how to discredit me if I ever became a problem. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. The judge's sentencing statement was scathing. He compared them to vampires wearing environmental halos, saying they had perverted every principle of conservation into a tool for personal gain. They got 20 years each, plus massive fines. Every asset they owned was seized, including their mansion and their beloved art collection. The judge specifically ordered that a portion of the seized assets be used to establish a fund for environmental restoration in the communities they helped poison. Sarah received a reduced sentence for her cooperation, but still faces 10 years. In a surprise move, she asked to address me directly before being taken back to prison. "I know it's too late," she said, "but you were the strong one. You actually stood for something while I just stood for show. I'm sorry I didn't learn that lesson sooner." The Clara Martinez Wildlife Conservation Foundation has expanded beyond my wildest dreams. We've established 3 more rehabilitation centers across the Mountain West, each focusing on different aspects of ecosystem recovery. Thomas heads our research division, which has become a leading voice in documenting and combating environmental fraud. Last week, we rescued another wolf, this one a pregnant female found trapped in an abandoned mine near one of Envirotex dump sites. Against all odds, she survived, and her pups were born healthy in our facility. We named her Hope. Watching her nurse her pups in our sanctuary, I think about legacy. My parents thought they were building one through fraud and manipulation. Instead, their name will be remembered as a cautionary tale of greed masked as environmental stewardship. The real legacy, it turns out, was the one my grandmother saw in me all those years ago. The simple belief that actions speak louder than accolades, that genuine care for our world matters more than any carefully constructed image. I've started writing a book about our experience, not to capitalize on the scandal, but to help others recognize and resist the kind of systematic corruption my family represented. The working title is The Price of Truth: How Environmental Fraud Poisoned My Family and Our Planet. Sometimes I visit Sarah in prison. Our conversations are different now, more honest, more raw. She's teaching environmental science to other inmates, using her knowledge of corporate fraud to help them understand how communities like theirs often bear the brunt of environmental crimes. My parents still refuse to acknowledge their crimes. Their last message, sent through their lawyer, was a threat to write their own book, exposing the truth about me. I almost laughed. They still don't understand that truth isn't something you can spin or manipulate. It's something that simply is, like the mountains outside my window or the wolves in our sanctuary. The Foundation's latest project is converting one of Envirotech's former dumping sites into a wildlife sanctuary. We're calling it the Truth and Reconciliation Preserve, a place where the land can heal from human greed, and where future generations can learn about both the cost of environmental crimes and the power of standing up for what's right. Grandma Clara's letter still hangs in our lobby, but I've added something beneath it, a simple quote that guides everything we do. The truth about our relationship with nature can't be found in press releases or profit margins. It's written in the soil we walk on, the water we drink, and the air we breathe. Our legacy is what we leave in these elements, not what we claim about them. Looking back, I realized that losing my family freed me to find my true purpose. Sometimes the highest price we pay for our principles turns out to be the best investment we could make in our future. The wolves howl outside my window as I write this, their voices carrying across the valleys where we once found only poison and now find hope. This isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of a different one. One where truth matters more than appearance, where actions speak louder than accolades, and where the real measure of success isn't what you gain, but what you protect. And that's a story worth telling. The story I thought was ending was actually just beginning. 2 years after my parents' conviction, their case has become a landmark in environmental prosecution, leading to investigations of similar schemes across the country. The FBI has established a dedicated environmental fraud task force, and they've asked me to serve as a consultant, helping identify patterns of corporate greenwashing. What started as our family's private drama has sparked a national conversation about environmental accountability. My book became a bestseller, not for its family revelations, but for its detailed exposure of how corporate environmental fraud works. Law schools are using it as a case study. Environmental groups cite it in their advocacy work. But the biggest change came from an unexpected quarter. Sarah's prison work teaching environmental science has evolved into a formal rehabilitation program. Green Recovery, as it's called, trains inmates in legitimate environmental restoration work. Upon release, they can join partnering conservation organizations. The irony isn't lost on anyone. My sister, who once orchestrated environmental crimes, is now creating a pathway for others to help repair environmental damage. Last month, I received a letter from my mother in prison. Unlike her previous messages, this one wasn't filled with accusations or manipulation. Instead, she wrote about watching a documentary about our foundation's work while in the prison library. "I saw the wolves," she wrote. "The ones you saved from the areas we helped poison. I saw how they're thriving now, how their pups play in clean water and hunt in restored habitats. For the first time, I understood what you've been trying to tell us all along. Success isn't about perception, it's about actual impact." Dad hasn't reached out, but his former business partner contacted me. Apparently, Dad spends his time in prison obsessively following news about environmental disasters, finally confronting the real-world consequences of the crimes he facilitated. He started writing a detailed confession, naming every company and executive he helped orchestrate environmental fraud for over his 30-year career. The Clara Martinez Wildlife Conservation Foundation has expanded into education, launching a program that brings at-risk youth to work with our rescued animals. These kids, many from communities impacted by corporate pollution, find healing alongside the wildlife we rehabilitate. We call it parallel recovery. As the land and animals heal, so do the people connected to them. Thomas has become a leading expert in corporate environmental compliance, helping companies transition from greenwashing to genuine sustainability. He's developed a certification program that requires real-time monitoring and community oversight, making it virtually impossible to fake environmental credentials. The Truth and Reconciliation Preserve has become a symbol of transformation. Where toxic waste once seeped into groundwater, endangered species now thrive. School groups visit daily, learning not just about wildlife, but about corporate responsibility and the courage to stand up for what's right. Sarah will be eligible for parole next year. She's asked to work for the foundation upon release, not in a leadership role, but as a regular staff member, doing the hands-on conservation work she once only pretended to care about. The board is considering her request, weighing redemption against accountability. Meanwhile, our family's story has inspired others to come forward. Children of corporate executives, employees of supposedly green companies, even government officials, all sharing similar stories of environmental fraud hidden behind charitable foundations and sustainability awards. The system that enabled my family's crimes is finally being exposed and dismantled. My grandmother's legacy has grown beyond anything she could have imagined. The trust she left me has been leveraged into a network of conservation initiatives across the country. Each project carries her name, not as a brand to hide behind, but as a reminder that one person's commitment to truth can ripple across generations. Last week, Hope's pups left our sanctuary, released into protected wilderness. We tracked them as they integrated with a wild pack, their GPS collars showing them ranging across restored habitats that were once devastated by corporate dumping. In their freedom, I see everything we've fought for, the triumph of truth over appearance, of restoration over destruction, of real legacy over false image. The wolves still howl outside my window every night. But now their chorus is joined by others, their voices echoing across landscapes we've helped heal. It's a reminder that nature's truth will always emerge, no matter how deeply we try to bury it. And in that truth, I found not just purpose, but peace. Just when I thought the story couldn't hold any more surprises, life proved me wrong again. The Environmental Fraud Task Force's investigations, sparked by my family's case, led them to something unexpected. Grandma Clara's old software company, now a multinational tech giant, had been using her environmental monitoring systems to help other corporations evade detection of their pollution. The company had twisted her innovation, designed to protect nature, into a tool for concealing environmental crimes. They used her name, her reputation, to sell software that helped polluters identify regulatory blind spots and hide their violations. The betrayal of her legacy was complete. But Grandma Clara, it turns out, had seen this coming too. Hidden in the trust documents, triggered by this specific discovery, was a final gift, the original source code for her environmental monitoring systems, along with detailed documentation of how they were meant to be used for protection, not evasion. Working with Thomas and a team of ethical hackers, we've spent the past 6 months reclaiming and updating her technology. The Clara 2.0 environmental monitoring system, as we're calling it, is being made open source. Any community can use it to monitor corporate compliance in their area, with real-time data that can't be manipulated or hidden. Sarah, recently released on parole, has found her role in all this. Her intimate knowledge of corporate fraud mechanisms makes her invaluable in identifying potential exploits and closing them. She works remotely, analyzing system vulnerabilities, her past expertise now serving protection instead of deception. It's strange, she told me during a video call last week. I spent years helping companies hide their environmental impact. Now I'm helping communities track it. The technology isn't that different. It's the intention that changes everything. My parents, watching these developments from prison, have finally broken their silence about the deeper history of their environmental fraud empire. Dad's confession has expanded into a comprehensive expose, detailing how they built networks of shell companies and fake environmental groups to help corporations evade responsibility for ecological damage. Mom has started working with prison psychologists, trying to understand why they chose this path. In therapy sessions, she's begun to unpack how their obsession with appearance and status led them to betray not just their family, but the very environment they claimed to protect. The Foundation's work has evolved in unexpected ways. We're not just rehabilitating wildlife anymore, we're rehabilitating the relationship between technology and environmental protection. The Truth and Reconciliation Preserve now houses a state-of-the-art monitoring station where community members can track environmental data in real time. Thomas heads our new tech ethics division, ensuring that every tool we develop stays true to its protective purpose. He's created a framework for ethical environmental technology that's being adopted by companies and organizations worldwide. The wolves we've released have become unknowing ambassadors for this new approach. Their GPS collars don't just track their movements, they collect data about habitat health, water quality, and ecosystem balance. Through them, we're learning how nature recovers when given the chance, and how technology can serve as a guardian rather than a tool for exploitation. Hope's pack has grown, incorporating other rehabilitated wolves. They range across territories that span both restored and still damaged landscapes, their presence a living measure of our progress. Through the Clara 2.0 system, anyone can track their journey, watching in real time as they reclaim spaces once thought permanently lost to corporate greed. Last month, I received an unexpected visit from one of Grandma Clara's old colleagues. He brought with him a journal she kept during her final years, documenting her observations of our family's dynamics and her hopes for the future. "Your parents chose the path of appearance over substance," she wrote, "but I see in you, Elena, the potential to merge both, to use technology not as a mask for destruction, but as a window into truth. The world doesn't need more successful people, it needs more people willing to look beyond success to significance." Reading her words, I finally understood why she structured my inheritance the way she did. She wasn't just leaving me money, she was leaving me a mission. To reclaim technology as a tool for environmental protection, to transform her legacy from one of innovation into one of restoration. The Clara Martinez Wildlife Conservation Foundation is now the Clara Martinez Foundation for Environmental Truth, expanding our mission to include technological innovation alongside wildlife conservation. We're building a future where environmental protection isn't just about preserving what's left, but about using every tool at our disposal to restore what's been lost. Sarah, in her new role, has begun mentoring young tech professionals, teaching them to recognize and resist the corporate pressures that led her astray. She's turned her experience of redemption into a roadmap for others, showing that it's never too late to redirect your expertise toward healing rather than harm. The wolves still howl outside my window, but now their voices carry across a landscape monitored by sensors and satellites, their freedom protected by the very technology that once helped hide its destruction. In their calls, I hear not just nature's voice, but the echo of Grandma Clara's wisdom. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories.